All right, it's 10:03, so, well, Adelaide time. So we might kick off, and as we'll just, our screens might move around a little bit as people come in. Welcome everyone. My name's Jessica Ellis. I'm the chair of the Arts Industry Council of South Australia, AICSA. AICSA is the independent sector-wide arts advocacy body in the state of South Australia, representing artists and organisations and advocating for the conditions of artists and arts and culture. Thanks so much for joining us today. I will acknowledge that we are probably all coming together on unceded Aboriginal lands, and I'll pay my respects to elders past and present of this land where I am Garneyata, and to elders past and present, and to any First Nations people joining us on the call today. I'm going to introduce our two speakers and facilitators today, and then I'll hand it over to them. Just to give you some context of this session today, we're speaking about sustainability and responsible arts sponsorship. With the background, we've seen a lot of movement around festivals, in particular with Darwin Festival and Perth Festival, both ending their relationships with fossil fuel companies from sustained pressure from artists and advocates. So let's start to think more about genuine sustainability, about divesting from fossil fuels, and how we can use our skills collectively to advocate for that change and for climate justice. So we're really thrilled to be hosting Alex Kelly and Jennifer Mills for this session today. Alex Kelly is an artist and organiser and filmmaker based on Dja Dja Wurrung country. Alex is producer of award-winning documentaries Island of the Hungry Ghosts, and impact producer on In My Blood It Runs, creative producer on Napachi Napachi, and a global impact and distribution producer on R.B. Lewis and Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything. Alex's current focus is the featuring practice The Things We Did Next, a collaborative hybrid of theatre, imagination and democracy. And Jennifer Mills. Jennifer Mills is an author, editor and critic based on Ghana Yatta, who works at the intersection of art, labour and the climate crisis. Her latest novel, The Airways, was longlisted for the Miles Franklin Award, and in 2022, Mills is an artist in residence at Vital Statistics. So I'll hand it over to Alex and Jen. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jess, for that warm welcome. I wanted to also acknowledge that I'm on Ghana Yatta here on a beautiful sunny day. So thank you, country, for having me. The meeting today is being recorded. If anybody doesn't wish to be recorded, you can turn your cameras off, but just be aware that anything that you share here might be on the record. Please, because there's quite a few of us here, please introduce yourselves in the chat. I'm just going to post a little agenda for today, but please introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, what your practice is or what your organisation is, and what country you're on. So I'm Jen, I'm an author, I'm on Ghana country. We're going to start with a short video that's going to sort of set the stage for today's discussion, and then Alex will give us some kind of background on the issue, why it's so important, and what the sort of campaign momentum has been like in recent times. It's been a really massive year for this issue. So after that, we're going to be using Jamboards. Has anyone used Jamboards before? I can't actually see you, so I'm not sure if you have, but they're just an online tool which is similar to a shared whiteboard where we're going to be able to share our ideas together. So this is going to be quite participatory. As the agenda shows, there's 4 different Jamboards. The first one is about mapping the problem, identifying it in South Australia. The second one will be about the obstacles. Why is it so hard for us to change this? Thirdly, campaigns, what kind of actions are already happening? And then fourthly, next steps, what kind of actions we're going to take next together. We'll close at 11:30. It is quite a tight turnaround time-wise, so I'm going to be an aggressive timekeeper on this. If you do have any access or technical issues, please mention so in the chat. You can direct message Kim Roberts here from AICSA if there's anything that you need sorted. It's really fantastic to see all of the introductions coming through on the chat. Please keep them coming as we progress. And I think that's it from me. I'll hand over to Alex Kelly.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. I'm on Dja Dja Wurrung country, essential goldfields in so-called Victoria. I will just share this quick excerpt from a film made by Gabrielle de Vietre, who's an incredible artist who on the weekend was actually just elected to the Victorian Parliament as a Greens member from Richmond, which is very exciting for us over here. If for some reason you can't see the video when I screen it, or you want to see the whole clip, I've just added the link in the chat. So I'll just play this 3-minute video, and if there's any issues, let us know. Let's put this to full screen and play.
This is a network map of the connections between the fossil fuels industry and the arts in Australia. It's arranging itself at the moment, but if I stop it and start to pull it apart, with the arts on this side and the fossil fuels industry on the other side, we can start to make some sense of it. Let me guide you through this map, unravel some of the stories that it tells, and pull apart some of the most interesting discoveries that we've made. On the left-hand side is the fossil fuels industry. It's made up of lots of sectors that all work together to keep the industry afloat. I'll go into detail about this side a bit later on. And on the other side are the arts and its various arms. We've focused on a handful of important institutions, including the biggest university galleries like this one, contemporary art organisations, state galleries and museums, the major performing arts institutions, and the main biennales and festivals. We've also included the Australia Council for the Arts because it's our national arts funding body and it's got some significant links to the fossil fuels industry. And then in the middle are the people and the companies that connect the two. The board members, the directors, the sponsors and partners that operate in both the arts and the fossil fuels industry. This industry is the single biggest contributor to climate change. And it's produced the conditions that have led scientists to warn us we have 12 years left to act before the world as we know it is lost. If you're wondering at this point what I'm doing talking about this in an art gallery as an artwork, let me explain in a way that goes beyond the sense that our climate situation is so urgent that it should permeate everything we do. Let's put it this way. Alongside hospitals and universities, museums and theatres are seen as places where respectable, tasteful and ethical things happen, where human beings act at the height of their social capacity. And it's this perception that makes the art world a perfect hotbed for companies responsible for the climate crisis to seek what is called a social licence to operate. A fundamental requirement for these businesses is to persuade the public to trust them. Mel Evans, a member of the artist activist group Liberate Tate and the author of Artwash, Big Oil in the Arts, calls this process artwash.
How is there this gap between all these harmful impacts that oil companies like BP have through their daily activities all around the world and our kind of continued acceptance of them as part of our lives, as a kind of necessary, normal, acceptable part of our lives? Well, a big part of what happens in that gap is artwash. is the way in which oil companies project a better image of themselves to the public through their associations with cultural institutions, perhaps with sports, through the different ways they find to maintain this thing they call a social license to operate.
So that was part of a brilliant artwork that Will Foster and Gabrielle de Vietro made called Maps of Gratitude, Lumps of Coal. And I really recommend checking out the whole film. And I often go back to this map because the absolute mesh of it and that interconnection between the fossil fuel sector and the arts can sometimes seem a bit overwhelming when we see it, but it's actually much better that we can see it and we know what it is than the kind of opaqueness that they try and create. So I suppose really what I wanted to do before we got into the Jamboard and thinking about some solutions together was just to talk a bit about the bigger context. And I'm not going to talk a lot about climate change because I think we all already knew, and certainly if we didn't already know, we definitely know now. Watching the floods, you know, I just read the other day 10,000 kilometres of roads in New South Wales have been destroyed by the flooding there. So we're seeing the impacts on our infrastructure. We've seen the fires, the floods around the world. We're seeing people be displaced. We're seeing, I also am an orchardist. I'm part of a collective farm here in central Victoria, and we're not going to have any fruit this year. We're seeing the impact on agriculture, crops, people. So we know that we are now in the climate emergency. And even though we know it, I suppose we're still trying to make sense of what it means to be living in this ongoing overlapping crises. But one thing that we know that we need to do is to get off fossil fuels immediately. And this video that Gabrielle made was made a few years ago, and she talks about having 12 years. And, you know, we keep hearing a shorter and shorter time frame that we need to do that by. And it's not only that we need to get off fossil fuels because these are the companies that have been pumping pollution into the atmosphere. It's also that these companies have interfered at a very deep level with our democracies and our capacity to make decisions, with our media, with science. We know that fossil fuel companies like Exxon are part of the reason that we haven't had the kind of climate action that we might otherwise have had because they worked so hard to repress the science. They're in the pocket, the revolving doors, every part of Parliament. You know, we're so used to this that we see politicians work as the Minister for Industry, and then once they've out of government, they go and head up the boards and sit on these organisations. In a way, we've sort of almost come to accept this kind of dystopian reality. But again, going back to the map that Gabrielle produced and some of the other research that many other people are doing, sometimes it can be a little bit of an overwhelming moment, this first moment when we do the research and mapping, but information is power. So I do want to just quickly show another slide, which gives us a bit of a sense of the scale of the problem in terms of cash. Right down the bottom here, $100,000 is what Santos was sponsoring the Darwin Festival of annually. Talking with Kelly Albion, who's an organiser at 350.org, about how hard it is to find the overall figures for the sponsorship of the arts. But I don't think that we would be, I don't think it would be a stretch of the imagination to imagine that they are subsidising and sponsoring the arts at far less than the $11.6 billion that the federal government are giving them every year in subsidies. So actually, I think we could argue that we are paying our taxes to these companies who are then subsidising us for a very small amount of their money and getting all of the goodwill and social licence from that. Many fossil fuel companies pay $0 tax. Santos in particular only paid $6 million tax on $28.9 billion worth of profit. And we know from research that is starting to, projections, which are often incredibly conservative, that these impacts of climate change are going to cost billions and billions and billions of dollars. So when we look at these figures, we know that the money is flowing in the wrong directions. And I just want to add another one to this list, which is the fact that the Australia Council for the Arts only have a budget of 24.9 million. So when you look at the Australia Council for the Arts budget up against the fossil fuel subsidies, I think we can see another really important nexus between our need and demand as artists and the arts sector for more money, and a very big pocket of money that we could draw some from, which is those fossil fuel subsidies. So one of the things, and I have done this a lot, and I'm sure many of the rest of you have, I've spent a lot of time thinking about art and impact and art and social change, and what is the role of art and what is the value of art and what does art do, and how can art create meaning, how can it bring people together, how can it build community, what are all these incredible things that the arts can do. And I believe in those things very deeply, but increasingly in our conversations in the arts about climate change, we've talked about what kind of art can we make, what art should we make, what is the role of artists in a climate emergency, should we all be making art about the climate emergency? But in that conversation, we've sort of missed out on having the conversation about our own complicity. In what ways are we providing cover for these fossil fuel companies? And certainly the great work that started to emerge in the UK with Mel Evans, who was in that video, and Liberate Tate, as well as other groups that were working against Total in the Louvre, or groups in the Netherlands trying to get companies out of museums there, or people trying to get the Koch brothers, a big oil brother company in the US, getting them out of the Museum of Natural History. This momentum and this conversation about social license and our complicity has really gained momentum. And this is a really important conversation, because if we're making art about the climate emergency, but it's sitting in festivals which are providing social license for the companies that are causing the climate emergency, that doesn't really matter how great the art is, we are complicit. And this really leads to the sort of question about, but where else are we going to get the money? And certainly we know in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a very clear attack on the arts. Brandis rolled back money. It's an ongoing problem, but that is not happening to the arts alone. This is something that is happening across health, education, many other sectors, and there's a bigger conversation there to be had about civil society, social services, social welfare, what is funded, and the decisions that are made about our tax money. But certainly when we look at that piece that I put up about, it's not a question of not having billions of dollars. In fact, we're not taxing these companies. We're actually paying them to extract, and then they're doing what they want with that money. So I think that's something we'll definitely come back to together, about this question of, but where else will we get the money? And we're so poor, shouldn't we just take it and run? And I certainly think that it's important to note, in the context of First Nations communities, that there's quite a nuanced conversation to be had there that really needs to be led by First Nations people, because this wealth is being extracted from unceded, stolen land, and absolutely that wealth needs to be, the decisions over that land and the land rights and the decisions about what is extracted need to lie with those communities. But certainly once there has been extractions, questions about royalties, reparations, taxes and payment, I think is a very big conversation that needs to be led by First Nations communities. And I think that there's a much more complex conversation to have there. But what I would say is that whilst I think these companies absolutely owe First Nations people their profits, they don't deserve to have their name badged on beautiful First Nations work. how we do the unbadging is a big part of this conversation. And I'll just wrap up by just kind of a bit of a summary of some of the incredible things that have started to happen. As I mentioned, that movement in the UK, Liberate Tate, to BP or not to BP, Shell Out Sounds and other campaigners that were bringing really amazing performative techniques to this conversation has spread globally. And here in the last year, there's been an incredible amount of momentum. I've been involved in supporting the campaign led by traditional owners and activists in the Northern Territory who've been campaigning for 7 years to get Santos out of the Darwin Festival. Santos, one of the big fracking companies that's working to get their wells all over the territory. And one of the, I think, important things to note as well is the Sydney Festival campaign almost a year ago now, the Sydney Festival boycott over the $20,000 sponsorship from the Israeli embassy. I think the amazing momentum around that and the incredible solidarity with the Palestinian community that emerged around that boycott sent shockwaves through the sector. And I think it's probably been a key part of why festivals have really stood up and paid more attention. I think for a long time, the Darwin Festival thought they could use gag orders in their contracts and put pressure on people behind closed doors and it wouldn't spill over. We've seen a lot happening in the sports space. Cricket Australia dropping their $40 million contract with Alinta, and the incredible solidarity of the netball players who stood with Janelle Wallum, who didn't want to put Hancock Prospecting on her jumper, and the $15 million from Hancock was hanging empty in the air until Visit Victoria picked up that sponsorship tab. So there is money, there's a lot of momentum. Fremantle Dockers, we'll talk about some other campaigns, Perth Chevron, Woodside, Perth Fringe Festival. I know there's a lot going on in South Australia. So it's a really good time to build narratives together, share some of the challenges. What are we finding is hard to talk to people about? How are boards reacting? What are we hearing from other funders and philanthropists, artists? So look, I feel like there's a huge amount of momentum and it's a great time to get organised. So it's a delight to be with you all.
Thanks so much, Alex. That was a really great introduction to the kind of state of play on this issue. The situation seems to be changing quite rapidly, I think, this year, with active campaigns on fossil fuel advertising as well. And the success of the Darwin Festival that seemed to come quite suddenly, but then it's incredible to be reminded that that's 7 years of hard work behind the scenes that we don't necessarily see. But it does feel to me like there's a snowballing kind of effect happening now with this discussion becoming much more open and public. And one of the things that I love about that.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I just noticed that Anna from Darwin Community Arts is here, who is a big driver and coordinator of that campaign. So I'm glad you're here, Anna.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I loved about Gabrielle's piece as well is that it reminds us that the arts has a lot of power. If we didn't have power, they wouldn't be interested in exploiting our public-facing work. We have a lot of capacity to make change and to do some real work in that image space. That's where our great strength is. So it's really up to us to make those changes. I think we're pretty ready to move on to our first jam board, which is really about mapping the issue for ourselves in South Australia. We're going to keep this discussion focused today fairly strongly on the South Australian issues, which it will hopefully simplify discussion a little and keep us focused, but feel free to kind of jump in with broader connections as well if you do notice that, because, you know, as the maps sort of show us, it is a really complex space that we're thinking and working in. Can everybody see that? find that Jamboard link.
I've just put it in the chat. So it's if people are on their phone, it might be harder to see. So we can add the prompt in the chat, and you could speak it out loud, or you could type it in if you want to add something. Otherwise, for those that are in there, on the left-hand side, under the circle with the arrow in it, there's a little square with writing on it, and that's a sticky note that you can click on to write a note, and it'll come onto the page. I can share my screen to show that as well. So people who can still see their screen, can you see this now?
Yeah.
If I hover on this little image here, that's the sticky note, and I can click on it, I can make it pink, and I can say, I can see the fossil fuel companies involved in the arts. I can see BHP, are they with AGSA?
Yeah.
And then my note will appear.
Sorry, Alex, we just need edit permission for this board.
Oh, thank you. That would help. I can do that. For some reason, it has gone slow on me. All right, now you should be able to get those sticky notes. Is that working?
Yep, perfect.
So I've just added Santos's major sponsorship of the Museum of Economic Botany, and between that and BHP sponsorship of the art gallery, I think are the two biggest players in art sponsorship in South Australia. But there may be other company involvement on boards or through advertising that we're not aware of. So please feel free to add to this if there's anything else that you are aware of in that space. And you can also just tell us if you can't access the board, and we can type it in for you.
I know that there's, I can't remember, I will have to look it up. It says board members on the Adelaide Festival that come from, I know there's some military and weapons ones, but I'm pretty sure there's some ex fossil fuel company people on the boards.
I believe there's a mining guy.
If you can't think of any in South Australia, there are other places where people have examples of visible arts, fossil fuel companies in the arts that people can think of. It's an interesting one because sometimes they become so ubiquitous that we stop seeing them. You know, we're so used to stadiums and hospitals and museums just being called the blah blah centre of such and such, or the blah blah stadium, that sometimes it feels like we stop seeing them. But it'd be great to think about places that you might have seen brands or companies. Yeah, the Australia Council chairperson was Sam Walsh, who was the CEO of Rio Tinto. That's a great one. Yeah, Woodside, Western Australian Symphony Orchestra, the Western Australian Ballet, the Youth Orchestra. What's Lumo Energy?
That's an electricity energy provider.
Mm-hmm. And what's
they are owned by Snowy Hydro, I believe.
Okay. Maybe while we're also doing the first of these jam boards, it might be good to hear if there's any kind of reflections that people have about how they feel about these companies being involved in the arts.
Yeah, please speak up or put your hand up and I will call on you. If you have anything to add about this situation.
Anna, if you have a moment, it'd be lovely just to hear from you in terms of the sentiment in the Northern Territory around Santos and the love that you all have for the festival, but how you felt about having Santos. It was the Santos opening night of the Darwin Festival.
Hello, sorry, I'm on my phone, so I haven't been able to get onto the board. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's been icky for a long time here, as you know, Alex. There's the brokenheartedness of going to one of our favourite and biggest cultural events, and especially the opening night, which is for a long time was only the only free content of the festival, so the only accessible content, and always First Nations artists. So yeah, participating, going along in that and being complicit in the branding of Santos was always, ongoing heartbreak for us. So it feels amazing that won't be the case next year, that it won't be called the Santos opening event. And it was so tricky for the First Nations artists that had to perform. Like in 2017, Leah Flanagan did speak out on the stage, and she, for years copped flack in the local community because it's a really small town, Darwin. But we still have the ongoing issue where, since the pandemic, impacts have really amplified their sponsorship of the festival. So we go into the festival and we walk under an archway that says Impact Sunset Stage. So it's so everywhere. Thanks, Alex. I don't know what else you asked.
No, I just really wanted to know how it felt before. I mean, we're going to get to solutions and strategies, so we'll definitely be drawing on your wisdom again. But yeah, just that. I think the complexity and even in the bigger cities, the arts community is still small. So I think that experience of how complex it was for people in a small community is an important part of the story, because it's sometimes a hesitation for people to take action. And how has that changed with the victory? Have you had people that said, or that hadn't really been involved, that have now said, oh, we're so glad that happened, even though we couldn't speak out about it?
Yeah, and I think one thing that keeps occurring to me is it's not actually about the money for the artists. So it's not about the earnings that they get from the festival. It's about the love of what they contribute to it. So the local artists that contribute a lot and make it actually a community festival for us. Otherwise, it goes along the path of a lot of those big festivals where it brings in a lot of shows. They just love, they're hardly getting paid a cent, and they just love what they're doing within it. So it's really tough. It's so tough on people.
Yeah, so people love it so much they felt a sense of risk that if they stood up, they might not be able to be involved in something anymore. Yeah,
completely. And it still feels that way for people.
Yeah, thank you. There's a few more that have gone up. The Dorothy McKellar Memorial Society, a poetry org sponsored by Whitehaven and Indometsu, I don't know them. Takari, the Centre of First Nations Culture, has a businesswoman from BHP doing the review, and that's another really insidious and really good point to have on here. Not just visible people who are on the boards, although certainly, as we saw in that map from Gabrielle, there's heaps of those, but also people who might do consulting or advising or reviewing and that kind of work. And certainly that's been happening in the arts for the last sort of 30 years, as there's been this kind of neoliberal push to turn all of our organisations into businesses and be sustainable and grow and all this kind of rubbish. But it's accelerated when these are people coming from fossil fuel industries. And it's one of those things that it's kind of incredible that we've become used to it. Like, we accept the idea that an accountant or a mining executive is going to come in and help our small to medium arts or large arts organisation. Like, just the logic that they're going to bring mechanisms across that are going to be worthwhile to us is quite incredible. But we've been under pressure in so many ways, and I think that those two things combined, like the pressure to be more of a business and to report in particular ways and to have profit and to show that we're sustainable, that we're going to get off our core funding and all this kind of stuff, has meant that there's even more opportunity for these corporates to come and sort of be there to guide us along the way.
And I think that it's really important to recognise that often our governance structures in the arts force us into these kinds of relationships where we are working with private sector interests that are not necessarily the interests of the arts, and that the kind of outsourcing and privatisation of public resources is a much vaster problem that the fossil fuel industry has been able to see and exploit. I don't know, Kate Larson, if you have anything to add about the governance problems, but I know that you've done a lot of work in this space. Sorry to put you on the spot there.
That's fine. I'm absolutely. It's this conversation that we're having today, which I'm so grateful for, tends to be happening at arts worker and practitioner level, and then there's this huge disconnect in getting the board members of our organisations on board. And some of them use the excuse of their fiduciary duty to the organisation and turning down all money is good money, but it's really disappointing that we haven't yet seen those board members take up just involve themselves in the conversation and be advocates for this kind of change.
Is anyone here on any arts boards? I'm on one.
I have been in the past. Any other arts board members here? You can just use a emoji or a hand raise or the chat.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that the kind of, you're right, the practitioner worker representation in this discussion is higher.
Yeah, I mean, I would have at least hoped for some spies.
They might not raise their hand, Alex.
Perhaps we should move to the next question, because I think we've got some great ideas that have come out there. And yeah, we've got oil and gas executives on the Western Australian Ballet Board, and and we started to touch on the question. So if you come at the top, you can click along to the second slide. So Anna, and for those that are on your phone, I'll put the question in the chat. We're just now the question is, why does it seem so hard to get fossil fuel companies out of the arts?
So this is where we're looking at what are some of the obstacles that we face when we're trying to take action. What are some of the things that are in our way? And I'm just going to add boards to the list, because that just came up, that is sometimes something that makes it hard. But please jump in and add your own thoughts here. This meeting's for you, please. It's really important that we're all participating in this discussion.
This is a great one. Organised a panicked about being seen to be turning down money or being ungrateful for money. So there's a fear. And I recently wrote a piece about Andrew Forrest, has from Minderoo Foundation, Fortescue Mineral Group, terrible actor in relation to native title. He's moving into the social impact film space, which I'm not very happy about. But a lot of people were saying to me, please don't speak about that, because if other funders hear you criticising Andrew Forrest, they might think that you're going to criticise them too, and they won't fund documentaries. And so this kind of fear that we need to be polite and nice and good little artists with our funders is a real fear. And yeah, Anna's saying that this is very much an issue with the issue of the board for the Darwin Festival, which has 2 former fossil fuel executives on it. And at the moment, there's an ongoing dialogue. People may have heard that in the case of the Darwin Festival, the campaigners helped broker replacement money, so that when the festival when Santos left, that there was replacement funding, but the festival is still reviewing whether or not they'll accept that funding. And from an outside perspective, I think that may have to do with the board, former Shell man, and his unwillingness to lose this battle. There's lots of reasons why this is hard coming up. People don't see it as a problem. Aren't Santos a great company? Which is exactly linked to this question of public perception. So these companies have done a really wonderful job of telling us that we need them, that whether they're talking about we're going to provide heaps of jobs, we're going to power the nation, we're going to bring in lots of money, we're going to back your football team. There's a whole lot of ways that they're doing this, but the fact that people do say that and feel that shows that they do have social license still, and it points to the fact it's even more important to try and undo that, but can be very hard. Arts organisations are paying lip service to environmental responses and responsibilities, long-term agreements, getting out of them, the fear that there's not enough money or the reality that there's never enough money, desperation, trying to survive, pressure from funding agencies like Creative Partnerships Australia. Do we have someone on from Creative Partnerships? Was that, I see in the chat, Stephen, are you on? Personal risk, career setbacks from speaking up. I think that's a really real one. Yeah, Mike Rann government in South Australia arranged with Santos to sponsor events for 10 years, in return for them monopolising in South Australia. So this is a really important point too, this kind of cosy relationship between governments and corporations, not just fossil fuel companies, but again, it's this kind of blurriness that sometimes we don't see it anymore, but governments have been able to step back from their responsibility, privatise things, and we start to accept it as kind of natural that the corporate world would be funding our institutions. There was a press release from Western Australia that just came out last week about major infrastructure projects over there that are going to be bankrolled by 10 big fossil fuel companies. And thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so there's this sort of bigger picture permeation of what we've accepted. If we don't take it, someone else will. That's a really great barrier or perception. Pressure, funding cuts, neoliberal expectations. So this one's kind of easy. Why is it hard? Here's all the reason.
I think there's it's really interesting to see that some of these reasons are quite big structural things, like, you know, what's Australia for? It's an extractivist economy. That's where all the money is. And some of them are quite personal and emotional issues, like, am I going to not get a gig as an artist for speaking out or signing an open letter about this issue? Some of that is like really deeply personal and emotional decision making. And then there's all the stuff in between, that a lot of it is about our ideas that we hold, or the images that we manage as arts organisations, trying to do the right thing by each other, trying to support artists, trying to run the organisation well, keeping the wheels oiled, and all those kind of everyday pressures functioning in the economy. So if anyone wants to speak to those issues, I'd really love to hear from you, particularly anyone that's working at an organisational level, about some of the challenges that you're facing in those kinds of decision-making spaces. Personally, I have more experience on this as an individual artist practitioner, and sometimes it is very difficult to take those risks when you're freelancing and you're really reliant on your relationships and short-term contract gig labour. So the kind of labour issues that I face are really tied up with my capacity to act. And that's something that I think the way that I've found to overcome that is to work collectively wherever possible, to find other people that will step up with me, and to find a way to do it that protects us and makes it a safer way of acting together. So maybe if anyone has any ideas about overcoming some of these obstacles that we've identified, that would be really great to hear as well.
We've just had feeling helpless to affect change, and I think that one of the things that I've found quite useful in the last few months has been starting to connect with people who are working on this issue from different angles. So people who are working in it around sports or working on different festivals in different places, because certainly going back again to the map from Gabrielle, when we see like 1,000 interconnected lines between the fossil fuel companies and the arts, it looks impossible to detangle. And certainly for one of us on our own to try and do that, helplessness is a natural and kind of smart response. But as Jen said, if we can work together collectively, it starts to be quite a different picture. And Kelly, I don't know if you want to, Kelly, do you want to speak a bit about that network if you're there?
Yep.
Be great.
Yeah.
Kelly Albion, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, we noticed that there was like lots of grassroots energy going on all across the continent around sponsorships, and so wanted to kind of make it bigger than the sum of its parts. And so yeah, we started convening monthly catch-ups for people who are working on campaigns or feel like they want to take part in some way. And it's got people from NGOs and artists and athletes and yeah, grassroots activists, the whole lot. And we kind of go through all the wins of the last period, because there's a lot at the moment, and then look at points for collaboration and working on that momentum, and if we have time, a bit of troubleshooting as well. So yeah, if you want to come along to those, we're going to have one more before the end of the year. Drop me your email and I'll add you to that list. It's a really nice community, and we've got a little Slack space now, and I think kind of having a zoom out from individual institutions really helps put it in perspective, that we can actually win and we can undermine the social license of these corporations.
And I think for us for me anyway, in South Australia, it's been wonderful to have a lens into the national campaigns and what's happening in other states. We sometimes feel a little isolated from the East Coast centric arts communities, and so it's been really fantastic being able to hook in with that on a national level. So I would recommend jumping on board.
I think it works a little bit like the divestment campaign too, right? Where your uni or your workplace or your super fund might not be willing to divest, but you're still part of a movement that is having victories. So you might be in South Australia and still struggling with Santos, but you feel connected to the Darwin Festival campaign and the Perth Festival campaign, the campaign to get Woodside out of the Freo dockers. And so that helps sustain you. And your wins are our wins for sure. Should we go to the next one, do you reckon, Jen?
Yeah, this feels like a really natural time to start talking about the campaigns that are already happening, and some of the wins that we have seen. You did talk a little bit about the Darwin Festival already, but maybe we could have a look at Perth, and then also some of the specific campaigns that are happening around sport in South Australia that are really interesting, and maybe worth jumping on from an arts perspective. So I'm happy to speak to the Tour Down Under stuff if you want to go over the Perth.
Yeah, and I think also just to say here, we could speak about some specific campaigns, but also talk about like tactics as well, like different kinds of things that might have worked, and kind of linking back to those three different things that you identified come emerging in the last slide. So the personal impacts, the structural issues, the funding stuff. So maybe we can also think about ways of addressing the barriers in this piece. The campaign to get Chevron out of the Perth Festival has also been a long-standing one. Fossil Free Arts WA, or Fossil, I think that's the name. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And that also follows on from quite a lot of movement in Western Australia to get Woodside out of the Perth Fringe Festival, which was successful, but only a momentary success, because then Woodside started to sponsor the Art Rage, the parent company, rather than the event itself. Tim Winton spoke out about the sponsorship of Become Ocean, a Western Australian symphony orchestra piece, and he spoke out about that at the Western Perth Writers Festival. And now we see the campaign with Woodside calling Fremantle Dockers fans, calling to get them out of the footy team, people looking at the role of Woodside sponsoring the nippers on the beaches, kids. There's a lot of stuff around STEM and science, and Western Australia is arguably the largest or the more visibly captured state. So the momentum there is really fascinating, because in a way that's probably the most far gone in terms of accepting fossil fuel money, but there's actually quite a lot of momentum there pushing back.
Yeah, I think for that reason, Western Australia is a really interesting kind of inflection point at the moment, because it is so intensely kind of entangled there. In terms of what's already taking place in South Australia, there is some campaigning that's going to be happening next year around the Tour Down Under, which is also majorly sponsored by Santos. Some of that is a campaign for ditching fossil fuel company advertising nationally, which would have an impact on Santos's ability to operate in Adelaide, if Adelaide City Council, for example, was to ban fossil fuel advertising. There's also Extinction Rebellion is planning to do some disruptive direct action events around the Tour Down Under. That also happened last race, and it's quite a contentious space in the sport, because I think a lot of cyclists see themselves as the good guys when it comes to the environment, and so there is definitely a big issue with that. Often the sport conversation feels quite emotional and political as well, but I think it's important that we see arts and sports as being able to work together in this kind of arena, and that we have things to offer each other, and that we're not always kind of competing for really scarce resources or public value, that we can actually do both. The Museum of Economic Botany, there has been some really good action there with the Friends of the Botanic Gardens and the volunteers that run the Museum of Economic Botany. There is actually some support for dropping Santos as a major sponsor. However, the Botanic Gardens as an organisation has really closed the door on that one, and I'm not sure how official the gagging is, but has pretty much shut down and advised people not to speak out about it. It's obviously hit a nerve, and I think that there's definitely room for a more public-facing campaign from the arts community on this one. I think the Museum of Economic Botany is beloved in Adelaide and very unique institution. It has an art gallery inside it. It has amazing artwork by Fiona Hall. And so I am going to be working on an open letter from the arts community to the Botanic Gardens, basically arguing that Santos sponsorship is inconsistent with the support for the arts and support for nature. And so if anyone wants to get on board that open letter with me, you're more than welcome. Open letters can be a really gentle way of kind of addressing the difficulty of isolation and personal risk. They can also, generate a little bit of media attention and a little bit of a conversation about the issue. They're not as directly effective as blockading the entrance of a building, perhaps, but they might be more accessible to more people, and thus kind of diminish the risk by working collectively. So that's the kind of, I suppose, tactics and strategies that we have already existing. It's really great to see so much coming up on the board as well. Alex, do you want to go through any of that?
Yeah, for sure. Just I guess a little bit on the last one. Just there's some questions about the Perth and Chevron split, being maybe that was a Chevron decision, and it seems amicable. And I would just and Anna, feel free to jump in, but just give that a little bit of context in terms of the Darwin Festival experience. It's like a festival, it would be very unlikely that a festival would ever tell you exactly what the conversation behind closed doors was, and that the fossil fuel companies will always try and spin their way out of it. So Santos released a festival saying that they felt they'd done a great job supporting the festival over the years, and they decided it was time for them to step away. So we saw that with Darwin as well, that the fossil fuel companies will, to the very end, do everything to control the narrative. And I think it can be a bit hard to kind of control your reaction, where you want to be like, no, but this was us, and is it a victory, and how do we claim the victory? Because they're even in the dying death throes, they're going to say it's not you that's won, and we see that across the board. And that again is why we need to be talking with each other, because we need to be saying to each other, hey, that pressure point, that conversation, that media work, that organising is part of this, because they will always try and say that it wasn't. That's part of the terrain. But there's some great, face-saving tactics is what someone called it, absolutely. There is still absolutely the capacity for artistic responses, performances, disruptions for opening night. We saw that at the Western Australian Ballet, and there's been some great performance interventions by ballerinas and dancers and musicians at events in Western Australia, connecting to other movements in sports, science, universities. The Fossil Ad Ban campaign, connecting, trying to get more community artists, workers and arts workers onto boards, journalists asking questions, so the conversations about the media, not inviting these climate criminals and politicians to our events. So there's a lot of different ideas here, petitions, this open letter, which I think we might talk about more in the next steps. Any patterns that you're seeing, Jen?
There's certainly a lot of these strategies and tactics that we're seeing are very public facing. And I also wanted to ask if there's strategies and tactics that we can use internally, maybe within arts organisations, or as bodies that work together in a more formal setting, how we might take action in that context. Yeah, lobbying for more public funding is a huge one together. And actually, I think that's partly why people are feeling a little braver this year about taking action, because we do have a friendlier, much more arts-friendly policy environment, at least in terms of the language that's being used. But I think it's also a moment where we're going to have to be really conscious of holding government accountable for the kind of statements that they're making and offers that they're making. Yeah, lobbying for tax reform, that's a really good one as well.
Yeah, I mean, if these companies paid their tax, there'd be a lot more money for all sorts of things. And there's going to need to be, you know, going back to what I said at the beginning, our roads, housing, hospitals, schools, like our buildings are going to be starting to crumble more and more with the impacts. Our arts galleries, and, you know, like the Lismore Regional Gallery was flooded and the library's lost, you know, so we're actually going to start seeing physical impacts of climate change on our infrastructure as well. I wonder, Kate, if you might have some more thoughts about engaging at a board level, because it does seem that there is a question here about political will. And obviously it's a huge thing. It's like, who's on the board? What's their ideology? Who are they connected to? Who's influencing them? Why are they on the board?
If you're a member-run organisation, can you then advocate for constitutional change? Does your constitution already have sustainability? What about strategic planning? Those sorts of issues.
Yeah, I'm really seeing a change at the moment, because everyone is doing their strategic plans again, whether for state or federal arts opportunities, or just because since the last time they did them, the world has changed. And I think although they're not, like, the impetus doesn't come from the climate crisis, a lot of organizations are starting to use this opportunity to move from that paying lip service to kind of just, you know, monitor our environmental impact kind of strategies, to actually starting to be proactive around this type of thing. So in that strategic planning process, I'm seeing a lot more a deeper and genuine conversations about what that means in terms of what money we take, in terms of how people operate in a world where the impact of the climate crisis is not theoretical anymore. How do you tour in a flood, through floods or bushfires? How do we embed our values in our organization on the one hand, and then take money from people who don't share them on the other? So I think it's starting to change, but again, it's complicated by the fact that we have the most competitive fundraising environment in anybody's living knowledge. And so a lot of boards are still really struggling with that, wanting to walk the talk on one hand, and then just finding it so hard to contemplate turning down any money on the others.
Yeah, and I think I've only just joined my first board, and one of the first questions I asked was, do we have any investments in fossil fuel companies? And the answer was, no, we don't. We've already had that conversation. And that was fantastic. I was very pleased that the organisation I was joining, which is the Australian Society of Authors, has already had that discussion and made that call. And sometimes it's just about asking that question wherever you go. And maybe it's something that hasn't come up, or there hasn't been that conversation yet. And maybe it's something that people have already decided, but they haven't done any sort of public announcement or big campaign around it. It's just very quietly occurred. So that those conversations are just as important.
Yeah, and maybe that's something that we can do really quickly and easily, is to have a checklist for board members to go into their board meetings and say, do we have any investments? Do we take any money? Do we partner in any other way? So it could be another interesting strategy to equip those board members and get them involved in the conversation.
There's a few things in that space. First, that one of the outcomes of the review into the Sydney Festival sponsorship from the Israeli Embassy was that the Sydney Festival will adopt a sponsorship charter. One of the asks of the funders to the Darwin Festival Board, the new funders, possible new funders, is fairly modest. It's really that the festival develop an ethical sponsorship charter themselves. The PVI Collective in Western Australia have developed a really great template code of ethics, and the NAVA, National Association of Visual Artists, NAVA, have just released an updated code of practice, and under that they have a section under principles and ethics. They have a section on climate adaptation and environmental action, which for transparency I was one of the assisting writers on, and this has a section about sponsorship as well. So it's starting to be more present, and it's heartening to hear that conversation from lip service to action is starting to be considered at the strategic planning level. And there's lots of conversations, very probably overdue, looking at organisations like Julie's Bicycle in the UK that look at, green touring and that sort of stuff. So I think there's a lot to draw on there. And Anna added that in the chat as well, informing boards and encouraging them to adopt ethical sponsorship frameworks. So I think this is a really good strategy, because most festivals, museums and galleries and organisations would already have both a sustainability policy and possibly a reconciliation action plan. So if you put together a sustainability plus reconciliation equals climate justice, it's pretty obvious that you can't also be taking money from planet wreckers. So I think the ethical sponsorship strategy is a good one.
Yeah, and that's also something that you can implement as an individual. You don't have to be on an arts board to do that. I think it's quite practical just to get into the habit of, if you get invited to an event or to speak at a forum or at a festival, to ask, does this have any sponsorship? And then be able to make the call. And I've only recently made that shift for myself. Not being in much of a position to refuse work, it is, sometimes a theoretical kind of refusal, but it is really good to have those conversations with festival directors and with people that are employing you, of just to sort of make that visible in the relationship.
Yeah, there's one other resource on that before we go to the next the last jam board, but First Nations-led theatre company in the US, Tara Moses, runs Groundwater Arts, and they created a new clause for artist contracts to say that you would refuse to take fossil fuel money for the work that you're doing. So that's also another really interesting tactic. I'll share that in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. And just while I remember, before we move on, I'll just share the Guardian article from last week about the advertising and sponsorship issue, and the comparison that's being drawn to tobacco companies, which many of us are old enough to remember when the tobacco companies were sponsoring sporting events, and now a lot of them unfortunately seem to have been replaced by gambling. But
yes, well, once we've knocked off fossil fuels, let's go on to gambling and weapons, shall we?
Yeah, work our way along to sugar.
Should we get to the next steps?
Yeah, I think this last board, I think we've already talked a little bit about what's possible and what kind of specific campaigns and actions are possible. And I think I want this last board to be a little more about what we're actually going to do and what we can implement in our own lives and communities. So please jump in.
Jen, what are you going to do next?
Well, I'm working on an open letter to the Botanic Gardens.
Great. Kate, what are you going to do next? Thanks, Jo. No worries. Thanks for joining us.
I just put it in the board. I'm going to work on an ethical sponsorship template and share it to whoever wants it.
Great.
That would be so useful, I think.
I know Kelly's been drafting something as a very simple one of those. So maybe Kate and Kelly, you can share that and see if that is useful. Awesome. I'm just going to randomly call on people now. Jen, what are you going to do next? Jen with 2 N's. Patrick.
Thanks. I'm thinking about disruption because I've also been working with Extinction Rebellion in South Australia, and I find those tactics are quite effective. I know at the recent oil and gas conference that was held at our convention centre, we were there every day disrupting, and because we were able to get a few people inside, they were able to report back to us that our disruption was very effective. International delegates from all over the world in the fossil fuel industry were seriously nervous, very guilty and ashamed of what they were doing. It was really effective. So my future thoughts are about working with Extinction Rebellion to get into arts events, including high-profile opening nights where the minister is likely to be there and so on. And we have strategies for being able to do that. And because I'm a performer myself, I've got a wild imagination about how I'm going to be able to do that. So anybody that brings a production to South Australia, which is clearly sponsored by fossil fuel companies, they'll be affected.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank
So
you.
Patrick, can I ask if, say, we are attending an event and would like Extinction Rebellion to come along and disrupt it while we're there, how would we go about making contact?
Yes, perhaps if we can chat afterwards, I can put you in touch with a few people at Extinction Rebellion that should be able to help us with that. I agree. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Is that Erin at AGSA? Are you there?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, I am based at AGSA. This has been really amazing to be a part of and just listen and take it all in. I'm project manager. I look after the biennial and the Ramsay Art Prize, so I'm not as involved with the other projects, particularly with BHP and Tarnandy, but what I'm thinking of next, I've just been taking mad notes and photos, but you're going to share the board, but I'm going to have a meeting with the directorate anyway. I've been texting them as we've been going along just to say, look, we need to talk about this. We're literally in the stages of our strat plan for the next 5 years. And I think there's a bit of work for us to do. So it's something that I feel comfortable I can have those conversations within the org. So that's good. So stay tuned, and any support or material that you guys want to send through to me, I'm happy to keep feeding it through to those above.
That's fantastic. Thanks, AGSA. It's really thanks, Erin. Sorry, it's really good to know that conversation's happening at AGSA because it's often the big obstacle that we come up with is
and I share the same love for MEB, Jen, as everybody does. And the Santos thing's interesting because I was looking on their website the other day and it's still all there. But I hadn't heard because we've obviously been working with them a lot, the gardens particularly. And it's just something that's sort of come back to my mind of like, this might be the time to really have a bigger conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I offer any and every assistance I can in that space.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
No worries. Siobhan, if you're there. Or Pam?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm actually talking from my COVID bed at the moment.
I'm sorry. I hope you get well soon.
Thank you. But as a photographer, I often, and I'll just put this in the chat, that I often photograph the Extinction Rebellion direct actions and enter them into photographic exhibitions and competitions and flood social media with them to spread the word in that way, to create a kind of ripple effect of the direct actions that they do. So, you know, definitely more of that. And I also am the vice president of a little organisation called the Art Science Alliance. So this is a fledgling organisation in Melbourne that is looking at getting artists and scientists to work together, particularly in terms of the science behind climate change and demystifying the science so that it's more accessible for everybody, and making artwork that makes the science accessible to people. So that's sort of what I'm on about.
That's great, Pam. And what is the organisation that's making the art science conversation happen?
It's called the Art Science Alliance.
Because there's also here in South Australia, there's also the Australian Network for Art and Technology.
That's right. Yes, yes, and we're very much in touch with them.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
And Illuminate Adelaide have entered the chat but cannot speak because there's a doggo barking in the background. But sounds like that could be a really great organisation to connect with. And I'm not sure if you currently have fossil fuel funding or not, but I think actually some of our focus should also be on those of us that don't yet or will not have fossil fuel funding, because if we can develop ethical sponsorship frameworks and I'm doing one with my football team at the moment, you know, we haven't got any fossil fuel sponsorship, we don't intend to, but if we do our policy now, then I can also talk to the media about my footy team's political position. So I think any festivals and organisations that don't take funding from fossil fuels and don't intend to should also set up these ethical sponsorship guides and policies. So thanks for being here, Illuminate. I'm not sure, I don't want to try and decipher your Zoom name, and so thanks for joining us. We've just got 10 minutes left. I wonder if there's anyone else who wants to jump in. We haven't heard from Emma or Grant.
Yeah, I'll jump in. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of teaching at university arts and cultural management courses in Australia and abroad. So I'll start to develop course materials for the arts workers of the future to assist them in making correct ethical choices, and also on what practical steps that they can take to get out of the arts funding from climate criminals.
Great, thanks. That's very key. Anna, next step in the NT is to get the board to adopt an ethical sponsorship framework, and wait to hear what they decide to do about the money. We'll be watching with bated breath, Anna.
I think the other big arts organisation that we haven't really discussed approaching in South Australia is the Adelaide Festival, which doesn't have any direct fossil fuel sponsorship, but they did this year have the big sustainability announcement, which was really about changing the packaging and the emissions. And so I think that there is room there to make maybe some inroads with the Adelaide Festival in having a little more leadership, given the resources that they do have. But I don't know if anybody has contact with Adelaide Festival folks.
I can share Beatrice's contact, who did the climate day last year, and also I know Matt Kesting from the Adelaide Film Festival is also very keen to support this conversation.
Yeah, and I think I have contacts within Writers Week as well, so maybe it's good for the various smaller festivals as well that form part of Adelaide Festival to push that conversation upwards.
Totally. And Kelly, you've joined us again.
One thing that we're going to do is, so we're kind of doing a two approach. We're going to write letters to all of the arts plus sports plus education, all the things that take fossil fuel sponsorship money, and ask them about their ethical screening and ask them to drop their fossil fuel sponsors and see what kind of low-hanging fruit we can pick off. And then also set up a pledge where clubs, organisations, institutions can say we're never going to accept fossil fuel money, and kind of set them up as champions. And so if you are part of an organisation that already has made that statement, or you would like to help reaching out to those organisations, I think that would be a really good alternative media story and narrative, celebrate the good guys and how it can be done.
Absolutely, and that's a really great way for us to go back to the various organisations that we interact with and work with to say, hey, there's this pledge thing happening, should we do it, how can we make that happen? So I think we can all take that one, particularly with small arts organisations that have already had that conversation, as a way to sort of make that into a public statement. It's a really good, I think that's really important. So thank you.
Yeah, I've just shared the spreadsheet that writer Penny Tangi put together, that's got about 450 orgs that she found that it's called Chumps and Champs. And yeah, she's been doing some work around the Whitsundays Writers Festival, that kids literature festival, that takes some money from some of the coal companies up in Queensland. So they are everywhere, but as I said at the start, identifying the map is the first step of untangling it. I'm just trying to find where you put your email in the chat, Kelly, so maybe if you put that again, or you post it in the Jamboard, that'd be great. Thanks. Emma, we're getting close to wrapping up, but we haven't quite heard from everyone. So I'm just checking if you're there, Emma or Jen, or if you have any last thoughts. Anna, I know you can't see the Jamboard, just the chat because you're on your phone.
I was, just to elaborate on that chat, is that the conversations we had in the lead up to this stage of the campaign, a lot of the other arts schools we spoke to wanted to adopt ethical sponsorship frameworks. So that's sort of here, echoing what everyone else is saying, get those arts orgs that are prepared, sign, doing that work, and then we create that network of people doing good work, and then just continue putting pressure on those that are being left behind.
Yeah, great, thank you. And thanks for all your amazing work up there.
Yeah, I reckon we've had some really incredible ideas and sharing, and it's really good to sort of have this really positive set of ideas and plans from everybody going forward, because I do think that we're catching this while it has a lot of momentum in the art space. So it's really good to have you all involved. Alex, is it going to be possible for us to save these Jamboards for our own kind of use from the Google Doc?
Yeah,
that might be a really good resource to refer back to.
Yeah, I think we'll share it with everyone, and we might just put together a list of some articles and links to different campaigns and stuff, so that an email can come out. And Jessica, to everyone who came along.
And we had quite a few people register for this event that have not been able to attend, and so it will be really, really good to broaden this conversation out there. I think finding each other and seeing that we're all sort of trying to take action and being able to work collectively is a really positive thing. So I wanted to also just say that I will email around another invitation to contribute to the open letter that I'm planning to the Museum of Economic Botany, which I'm planning to time with the Tour Down Under campaigns in January 2023. So expect some emails from us. And I wanted to say thank you to everybody for participating. It's been really fantastic to see all of your energy and enthusiasm, and it's been really encouraging. And thank you, Alex, for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us. It's been really great having you here. And thanks very much, AICSA, for hosting us, and to Kim and Jess for all of your organising work. You've been really great. Supporting this conversation is really important. So it's been really good to have that leadership.
Absolute leadership. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you too as well, Jen, and Alex and everyone here. Thank you, Kim, for getting us up and running with this event. And thanks all. It's good to see you all and good to see all those great ideas. Keep an eye out. The Arts Industry Council is working on an event in January around the Tour Down Under. So once we've got more information that we can share with you, we will. And for those of you who are in Adelaide on Ghana Yada, please join us next week. We've got an Arts Industry Council end of year gathering at the Weedy. So that will be a good time to catch up and strategize on some of these things. Thanks again, everyone. We'll keep in touch over email and go well today. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.